Hey guys, Utah100 here. Alright, and now here I am to review number 2 for my picks for the top 10 best live action Disney movies. Now at number 2, here I am with a review for Mary Poppins. So, yeah, I'm sure just about all of you were expecting me to review this movie, with me already reviewing like Bedknobs and Broomsticks and Saving Mr. Banks. Yeah, a lot of you were probably expecting this to come. So, yeah, but yeah, Mary Poppins, it is just a Mary Poppins is just like a magical masterpiece, really. I mean, yeah, Mary Poppins is just really an outstanding movie. I mean, it's just like a great film. Really, Mary Poppins is just like one of Disney's best films of all time. I mean, yeah, it's just like such a phenomenal, magical masterpiece, really. Everything about Mary Poppins really is just really great. There's this movie just really has everything. It has great performances. It has great music. It has great songs. And it has a lot of great scenes in it. Mary Poppins just has it all. Yeah. This movie has a lot of great performances. Yeah, Julie Andrews is phenomenal as Mary Poppins, and so is Dick Van Dyke as Bert. And yeah, they're both like just really great. They in this movie. Yeah, and yeah, let me just talk about Dick Van Dyke's accent real fast. A lot of people really have just really made fun of Dick Van Dyke's accent in this movie. And yeah, people have just really said that this was a terrible accent. Me personally, I really don't think it's that bad. I could look past the accent when I was a kid. I really didn't mind the accent at all, and even today I still don't mind the accent. So yeah, Dick Van Dyke's accent really is not a problem for me. And yeah, even if it is a problem for anyone, Dick Van Dyke still is really great in this movie. So yeah, I think a lot of people could really look over the accent. Yeah, and of course, Mr. Banks, played by David Tomlinson, he's really good in this movie, and Glynis Johns as Mrs. Banks, she's good, and yeah, a lot of really great performances and acting in this movie. And of course, a lot of really great songs in this movie, like Spoonful of Sugar, or Jolly Holiday. Yeah, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. I love to laugh. Let's go fly a kite. Yeah, just a bunch of really great songs in this movie. Of course, by the Sherman Brothers. Yeah, this just shows how talented the Sherman Brothers really were. Yeah, and a lot of really great moments in this movie, like the step in time sequence, and some also with them exploring the chimney sweep world, and the I love to laugh scene. Just a bunch of memorable moments in this movie. And yeah, like Nostalgia Critic said in his December review, is there anything in this movie that's really not good about it? Really the only thing that I can really say is maybe there are some scenes that do drag on a little too long, or they become unfocused. But yeah, it's just a minor nitpick I think that some people may have, and even then this movie, it's just a really phenomenal movie, as I said. There's really nothing about this movie that I can really say is bad about it. This is probably one of the most perfect movies of all time, most perfect Disney movies anyway. Yeah, I would definitely give this a solid 4 stars out of 4. It's just a masterpiece. Yeah, so after reviewing Mr. Banks, I do kind of know a little more about the backstory to this film, and I have to honestly say that in a way I am sort of glad that Walt Disney kind of did break some promises he made to P.L. Travers, because quite honestly, if he actually did follow through with some of P.L. Travers' demands for this movie, I honestly don't think this movie would have been as great as it is. And yeah, it's just this movie is just yeah Walt Disney just made this film perfect. Perfect. Yeah, and yeah, it's just just a a phenomenal movie, as I've kept saying. So yeah, let me just not waste any time. Let me just talk a little. Let me just start talking about the movie. Alright. So the movie opens up the movie takes place in London in the year 1910, and yeah, the opening credits are just overhead shots of London at the time, during the opening credits, and it eventually like does show Mary Poppins like in the clouds. Yeah. And then it just shows them like Bert like in the park like putting on a musical show for people and stuff, and eventually like he does like talk address like us the audience, and he just like gives a tour of Cherry Tree Lane, and he eventually then stops at the Banks house, and it's showing then that the current nanny for the Banks children, Jane Michael, she ends up like just leaving, since deciding that she was just done with Jane and Michael. Yeah. Well, and yeah, as Mrs. Banks then arrived home, like in this movie, like she tries to fight for women's rights. It's like trying to make their rights equal to men. Yeah. And yeah, she was just like trying to convince Katie Nana to stay, but she ends up leaving anyway. Yeah. And then once Mr. Banks then arrived home, like he was like pretty cheerful, but then he learned that Katie Nana had left and Jane and Michael were missing. And he tried to call the police, but then like there was a constable then like arriving at their home to bring Jane and Michael back. And then yeah, it was then revealed that the reason Jane and Michael were missing was just because they were trying to chase after a kite that they lost, which didn't turn out being very good. Yeah, and yeah, eventually afterwards, like Mr. Banks then later on just decided to just take it upon himself to find a new nanny to like set Jane and Michael straight. He wanted to advertise for a no nonsense stirring nanny, but Jane and Michael also like wanted their own type of nanny that they wanted to advertise for. They want like a kinder, sweeter nanny to them. But yeah, Mr. Banks was not on board with Jane and Michael's suggestion, and then he ended up like ripping up their letter and just throwing it into the fireplace. But then, like it then showed like the pieces of the letter then was just like floating up the chimney and into the sky. And then the next morning, it then showed like the wind started to change, coming from the east instead of the west. And it showed like outside the Banks home there was like a line of nanny applicants. It's outside, and that were kind of like elder and sour faced and stuff. But then it like just showed that there was a huge gust of wind that ended up blowing them all away. And then Jane and Michael could see like a younger nanny applicant descending from the sky with her umbrella, which was, of course was Mary Poppins. Yeah. And then yeah, Mary Poppins then and appeared to Mr. Banks, and then yeah, she then just was reading off the letter Jane and Michael made, and Mr. Banks was like puzzled how she really got it since he tore it up, and yeah, he just was like trying to figure out what really happened, and as he was like he tried looking in the fireplace, and like was caught by surprise a couple of times and hit the back of his head in the fireplace, which was funny, yeah. And just because of how puzzled he was, like Mary Poppins like did like agree to the request of Jane Michael's letter, but she also like promised that she'll be firm with the children. And then Mary Poppins was then just like basically like forced to end up hiring herself as the nanny, and then she went up to meet Jane Michael, and it showed like she was just like sliding up the banister for the staircase, which was interesting and creative, yeah. And then, yeah, it was just showing her unpacking her carpet bag and, like, making her room a home for her. And it was just showing, like, the bag was, like, a normal sized bag, but she was able to pull a bunch of things out of it that couldn't even really fit into it, like a really long hat stand and mirrors and, like, plants and mirrors and stuff, yeah. And lamps and stuff, yeah. It just showed, like, she was really magical. Yeah. And then later on, she then just decided to like play a game with Jane and Michael to clean up their room, and her game was really just like trying to find fun in the job, and then just end up snapping the fingers, and it would like cause like a part of the room to clean up itself, stuff. Yeah, and as they were doing this, Mary Poppins was singing "Spoonful of Sugar." Yeah. and she was just then just like snapping to like get some stuff cleaned up. Like she showed like there were some clothes that put themselves away, and then like the beds were making themselves, and then eventually like Jane joined in. And help clean up the room. And then, yeah, Michael was actually having some trouble snapping, but then, like, he eventually did manage to snap. But then, like, then just like everything in the room just ended up like going out of control and stuff. And then Mary Poppins was able to calm them down, and make it stop. And then, yeah, she then took Jane and Michael for outing in the park, as she was trying to say. And then, as they were leaving, like the housemaid Ellen then like saw Mary Poppins, Michael, and Jane just sliding down the banister again. They were leaving, yeah. And then it showed like Bert was like out, like now working as a scriber. He was just like drawing up some chalk drawings in the concrete and stuff, yeah. And eventually, Mary Poppins, Jane, and Michael then came across Bert, and then Bert was just explaining to Jane and Michael those things Mary Poppins really has the power to do. Yeah. And as Bert was showing them his drawings, then they decided they wanted to go in one of them. And then, yeah, Mary Poppins eventually agreed, and then she ended up just like transporting all four of them into the drawing. Yeah. And like Jane and Michael then just ran off to a nearby county fair, as Mary Poppins and Bert just went on a stroll throughout the drawing and stuff. Yeah, and during the whole thing, like Bert was singing "Jolly Holiday." Yeah, and they like inside the drawing, of course, it was like animated there. Yeah, and they like just saw a bunch of animals and stuff, and eventually they like came across like a tea bar or something, as there were like a quartet of penguin waiters there, and like Bert and the penguins were just like then dancing for Mary Poppins, and eventually later on, like Mary Poppins and Bert were back with Jane and Michael just riding a merry-go-round, but then like the merry-go-round like became like enchanted, and then all the horses of the merry-go-round just like ended up like hopping off of the merry-go-round, and yeah, Mary Poppins, Bert, Jane, and Michael were all just riding the horses down the path, and then they eventually like ended up like getting caught up in like a race course, and Mary Poppins ended up like winning that race. Yeah. And, and then as Mary Poppins was like being asked to describe her victory, she then was like then just singing the Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious song, but then it and afterwards, like, then just a thunderstorm then started, and like, it then just transported Mary Poppins, Bert, Jane, and Michael out of the drawing, and then it showed, like, the rain, which just ended up, like, ruining all of Bert's drawings and stuff, yeah. And then Bert then just decided to take on another job afterwards, yeah. And then the next day, as they were, like, on another outing, like, a local like neighborhood dog or something, Andrew, then approached Mary Poppins, Jane, and Michael. Then Andrew was just then telling Mary Poppins about Uncle Albert, and yeah, there was a problem with him. And then Mary Poppins, Jane, and Michael then met Bert, Uncle Albert's, and take a look. And then it showed like Uncle Albert was like floating up on the ceiling, just like laughing uncontrollably. And yeah, this scene just always like cracks me up. Like this scene is just hilarious with all the laughing. Yeah. And yeah, Uncle Albert was just like saying that he just likes laughing and can't help himself, and yeah, we had the "I Love to Laugh" song, yeah. And then it eventually like just caught like Bert, Jane, and Michael to then just like float up to the ceiling also, and then yeah, how Julie Andrews was able to keep a straight face for this scene is beyond me. Yeah. And then yeah, they then just all had some tea, and then they were just like telling some jokes, and then like in order to get down, they had to think of something sad, and Uncle Albert was like starting to tell something sad, but then he like turned it into a joke, and they all just like continued to laugh and floated back up again. But then when it was time for them to leave, like they all then just like came back down and stuff. Yeah, and then through like it was showing that Mr. Banks was like noticing like everybody like becoming more cheerful around the house, and he just found it as an act of irresponsibility by Mary Poppins, since it also all this cheerfulness started when you arrived, and he was just like saying that like especially Jane and Michael need to understand the seriousness of life and stuff. And then he then eventually was like threatening to fire Mary Poppins, but then Mary Poppins then just decided to convince Mr. Banks to then just take Jane and Michael on an outing with him to the bank. And so then he agreed to take them to the bank in the morning. And then, yeah, as Mary Poppins was like singing Jane and Michael to sleep, she was telling them about feeding the birds, and she had like a snow globe of the cathedral in London, and she was singing that "Feed the Birds" song to Jane and Michael, and then yeah, it eventually like brought them to sleep, and then the next morning, like Jane and Michael went with Mr. Banks to the bank, where like they met like some of his like superiors, including like Mr. Dawes Jr. and the elder Mr. Dawes, who was probably, my guess is like the Mr. Dawes Sr. was probably like over 100 years old, considering like how old Dawes Jr. was. I have to think that Mr. Dawes Sr. was probably at least over 100 years old. Yeah, and of course, like in this movie, he's also played by Dick Van Dyke. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, Michael had like some tuppence with him. And yeah, Mr. Banks and the other workers were just like trying to really get Michael to invest his tuppence into the bank, but Michael was wanting to use his tuppence to feed birds because of what Mary Poppins was singing about before. Yeah, but then Mr. Dawes Sr. was just like really being aggressive towards Michael, and then he eventually just ended up snatching the tuppence out of Michael's hand, but Michael then just like wanted it back, and then yeah, it started like a whole commotion in the bank when Michael was yelling that he wanted his money back, and all the other customers like were demanding their money back, and it just ended up like causing a bank run, and Michael eventually got the tuppence back, and then Jane and Michael ended up fleeing the bank, but they ended up like getting lost into the in the city on the East End, but they eventually like ended up running into Bert, and Bert was kind of like a mess because he was a chimney sweep now. And yeah, Jane and Michael were just telling Bert about what happened, and Bert was just like trying to tell Jane and Michael that a father could always use help from the children. And then he ended up taking Jane and Michael home and yeah, singing the Chim Chimney song. Yeah. And once he brought Jane and Michael home, like somebody needed to watch over Jane and Michael, and so they asked Mrs. Banks asked Bert to watch over them, and since he's a chimney sweep, she asked him to sweep up their chimney since it was a mess. And then, yeah, as Bert was showing Jane and Michael like up the chimney, you like how it looks. He then was like having Jane and Michael like kind of like just brush the chimney, and then eventually, like, Michael ended up, like, getting sucked up the chimney onto the rooftop. And then Jane gave also followed. And then, yeah, Mary Poppins and Bert then just also gave followed also. Yeah. And then once all four of them were up on the rooftop, they then just saw the whole chimney sweep world, as they referred to it. And then they decided to explore it. And then they eventually, like, came across some other chimney sweeps heaps, which were like friends of Bert, and then they all put on like a song and dance number with the step in time sequence, which was a really great segment. It just went on forever to like a circus act, and then eventually Mary Poppins got involved with it. Yeah, yeah, and then it eventually like led back down to the Banks home, and then yeah, all the sweeps were then just like dancing around with like the other house workers like Ellen and the cook and Mrs. Banks and everything, and then Mr. Banks eventually arrived, and then all the sweeps were then just shaking Mr. Banks' hand and leaving. And then that night, Mr. Banks also received a phone call from the Dawes, and yeah, they were just telling him to come to the bank at 9 o'clock that night. Yeah, and then yeah, as Bert was like packing his stuff up and leaving, Bert was just like telling Mr. Banks he should spend more time with his children before they grow up, and then he eventually left. And then Jane and Michael also like were apologizing for what they did at the bank and gave Mr. Banks the tuppence. Yeah. And then yeah, it showed like Mr. Banks then just walking to the bank, and then it like showed that the the bird lady that was like feeding the birds wasn't on the steps anymore where she sits. And yeah, the nostalgia critic put it like good, like could she have died during that night and that's why she's not there, or did she just like go to another place? I mean, I guess it just leaves a question left unanswered for us to figure out. Yeah. And eventually, Mr. Banks then arrived back at the bank, and then, yeah, Oz Jr. was just like really giving Mr. Banks a cashiering. He was like ripping the flour in his coat, and then he like turned the umbrella inside out and punched a hole in his hat. And when Dawes Sr. asked Mr. Banks if he had anything to say, Mr. Banks just looked at the tuppence, and then he was just like starting to laugh, and then he was just like blurting out supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, and then yeah, he was just like then doing everything Jane and Michael were trying to tell him throughout the movie, like saying one of Uncle Albert's jokes, the wooden leg named Smith, yeah. And yeah, he was just like talking about Mary Poppins, and then as he was leaving, he was just really cheerful and singing Spoonful of Sugar. And then Dawes Sr. was just like trying to figure out what the wooden leg named Smith joke meant, but then he then finally understood it, and then was just like really laughing about it, and then he was just floating up into the air as he was laughing. Yeah. Then the next morning, like it then showed like the wind changed again, coming back from the west, and yeah, this then just was when Mary Poppins decided to leave, which really doesn't really make, I don't really understand why she really decided to leave when the wind changes. I mean, she told this to Jane and Michael before that she would be staying until the wind changes, which why did she need to leave when the wind changed? I mean, yeah, that's beyond me, but yeah. And as Mary Poppins was like packing her stuff up, like Mr. Banks was then like presumed to be missing, like jumping into the river or something. But then it showed that he was just down in the cellar and really cheerful when he was found by Mrs. Banks and stuff. Yeah, and then he called Jane and Michael downstairs, and then he showed them that he fixed their kite, and then yeah, he was just singing "Let's Go Fly a Kite," and then they all went out to fly the kite. And then it showed like Bert was also like out in the park like giving out kites, and then yeah, then Jill they were flying kites, and then Dawes Jr. was also there flying a kite, and then he was just telling Mr. Banks that his father had died happily from the joke, and he really wasn't sad about it because he hadn't seen him so happy in his life. And then he then decided like he made Mr. Banks a partner at the bank, and it just then showed like Mary Poppins and just watching like the family, and she was basically saying that she did what she needed to, and then it just showed her flying back off into the sky with her umbrella, and then yeah, as she was flying off, Bert was then just saying goodbye to her and not to stay away too long, and yeah, as Mary Poppins was flying away, she actually heard that and just looked back to Bert and as he waved off. And that's how the movie ended, and it just showed like Mary Poppins then just flying away. So, yeah, a really, really great movie, just like a phenomenal masterpiece, really. As I said, 4 out of 4 stars, just a magical, phenomenal masterpiece. I mean, yeah, I would say definitely check this out, but yeah, probably all you'll have already. So, yeah, a really great movie right here, and yeah, definitely like one of Disney's best works of all time. Alright, and so yeah, I know what you're thinking now. Probably like, since Mary Poppins is such a phenomenal film, what could really be better than Mary Poppins? What live action film could really be better? But there is one other live action film that I do have higher, and I actually do think is better than Mary Poppins. So what will that film be? Well, it's another like a classic Disney film like that, and I have a feeling some of you may know what it is, but yeah, I'll be reviewing that next as I finish off these reviews. So yeah, stay tuned for that coming up, and yeah, see if you're right with what you think it may be. Alright, but anyway, so yeah, that does it for my review of Mary Poppins. I hope you guys enjoyed this review, so yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.